Could they really break up Canada?
2 weeks ago, I would have said no, but that is not a rhetorical question anymore. That is the opening line of a real news article in the National Post about Alberta Separatists meeting with Trump's people. And now they're planning a tour of Latin America to sell their breakup plan.
Not to sell more beef, not to attract tourists, to rustle up support for Alberta leaving Canada.
After months of private meetings in Washington, they're fanning out to foreign capitals looking for friends with open checkbooks. If, actually, they say when, they get a yes vote on independence.
So let's be crystal clear here. Canadians are traveling abroad not as diplomats, but as separatist lobbyists. They're asking foreign governments to take sides in a Canadian territorial breakup. The goal isn't to sell canola, it's to build a network of foreign governments who will recognize and support an independent Alberta if they can trigger a referendum and win it.
And that is the line they are crossing. They are not just arguing about equalization payments at home, they are inviting foreign interference into Canada's internal borders.
Former Alberta cabinet ministers are already calling this modern treason in spirit. Not in the old-fashioned sense of raising an army, but in the modern sense of asking other countries to meddle in the democracy that is not under occupation, not under dictatorship, and not being denied elections.
Now, some people watching are probably thinking, hang on, shouldn't these guys be locked up? It sounds a lot like sedition to me.
And on a gut level, it sure looks like it. When you're flying to Washington and Buenos Aires asking foreign governments to help carve up your own country, it feels like betrayal in capital letters. But in Canadian law, treason and sedition are narrowly defined. You're talking about war, violence, overthrowing a government by force, or handing over real secrets.
These guys are doing it in the boardroom with suits, meetings, PowerPoints, no guns. Oh, social media interference. It's still dangerous and it still weakens Canada, but according to our laws, we can't stop them with handcuffs. But you know what? We can stop them by exposing it, fighting it in court and politics, and making sure they lose so badly in public opinion that nobody dares to try this again.
Because while we're all distracted with the Epstein files and floor crossings from the Conservatives, they just keep going back. They keep reaching out. They keep turning Alberta's future into a pitch for foreign power brokers. And that matters because foreign governments, they're actually taking these meetings.
So let's stop a second and go a little bit deeper into all that, because the way these guys sell it, you think you wake up on the next day in some energy superpower with lower taxes and more freedom. End of story.
But in the real world, you're walking away from more than Ottawa talking points. You're walking away from Canadian healthcare, Canadian pensions, and the basic security of being part of a larger country. You don't just keep the Canada Health Act and slap a new logo on it. You have to rebuild an entire system from scratch while paying for a new border, a new currency, and a new national government.
You think the system is strained now? Try running it alone while your tax base is spooked, your capital is leaving, and every investor is wondering if they should move their head offices to Vancouver or Toronto before things get messy.
And it doesn't stop there. You lose guaranteed mobility rights inside of Canada. Right now, an Albertan can move to Nova Scotia or Ontario with full rights, no questions asked. In their new experiment, you're a foreign national at the mercy of whatever deal is on paper. You lose a say in federal decisions that still affect your life. You lose the protection that comes from having 40 million people behind you instead of 5.
And for what? So a handful of guys can stand in Washington and say, look at us. We're now rubbing elbows with Bezos, Tim Cook, and Putin, while Alberta families are the ones paying for every hole in that plan.
And they didn't stop there. On top of that, they talked about 2 post-independent pipelines running through the United States, one through the Midwest to the Gulf Coast, and one through Montana or Idaho and Washington to the West Coast.
How convenient. In other words, a future where Alberta has broken away from Canada only to double down on shipping its oil through the U.S. and depending on American ports and American regulators for basic access to tidewater.
That's the picture they painted in Washington. A new, independent Alberta, backed by American money, recognized by the White House, and tied into American infrastructure from day one. And here's the reason that it should matter to every single Canadian. This is not just about Alberta versus Ottawa. This is about Canada versus Trump's America. Every time these separatists get on a plane, they weaken Canada's leverage as a united country.
This isn't a joke. This is not a stunt. This is a coordinated campaign to put Canada on the chopping block, province by province, with foreign backing.
So today, we're talking about one of the most dangerous stories in the country. And yes, you need to hear this.
Let's start with the cast of characters first, because nobody voted for these people, but somehow they're treating our country like it's for sale on Facebook Marketplace.
At the heart of this is the Alberta Prosperity Project, APP for short. Think of them as a separatist lobby group with a very expensive wish list and zero self-awareness.
Their co-founder, Jeff Rath, has been down in Washington meeting with State Department officials, openly talking about how the U.S. could help Alberta negotiate independence from Canada.
Then you've got Dr. Dennis Modry, APP CEO, riding shotgun on all of these trips. And hovering on the edge of all this is Cameron Davies, leader of the Alberta Republican Party. Yes, that's the actual name, who's planning his own international tour to sell Alberta independence.
So this is not some anonymous Telegram group anymore. These are named people flying on real airplanes, scheduling real meetings with real U.S. officials about dismantling Canada.
Who elected them to redraw the map of Canada?
They're not premiers, they're not Indigenous leaders, they're not even members of Parliament. They're a handful of organizers and would-be power brokers who seem less interested on fixing Alberta's real problems and more interested in auditioning for the Billionaire Boys Club.
You can feel it in the way they talk. Cabinet-level meetings in Washington, photos at Mar-a-Lago, big dollar figures, pipelines on maps. They're not thinking like people who plan to live with the consequences. They're thinking like people who want to stand on stage next to Trump, Musk, or Zuckerberg and say, "We delivered a country."
Meanwhile, the people who actually live in Alberta are the ones who would lose their healthcare safety net, their stable currency, their rights inside Canada, and their reputation as one of the best countries on earth. And that's true. We have a video all about how Canada is #1 in the links below.
So when they tell you that they're doing this for the people, ask yourself, which people? The nurse in Red Deer who will watch your hospital budget get torn apart? The teacher in Lethbridge whose pension suddenly depends on a brand new currency and a $500 billion US credit line? Or the small circle of men who are measuring themselves against tech billionaires and strongmen instead of against the neighbors they're supposed to represent?
To those who support this, wake up. They're not building you a better life. They're building themselves a ladder, and they're using your province, your rights, and land that isn't even theirs as the rungs.
And that tells you everything. If you choose that over your own country, over your own neighbors, you're not just frustrated with Ottawa anymore. You're betting Alberta's future on a man who has already shown us exactly how casually he's willing to treat literally everyone. And now, after U.S. outreach, they are planning to expand this campaign to Latin America.
Cameron Davies, the leader of the Republican Party of Alberta, told reporters that he has trips booked to Argentina and El Salvador in 2026. Hey, because when you're trying to break up a G7 democracy, obviously the logical move is, let's go pitch it to Javier Milei and Nayib Bukele.
Earlier this year, another article revealed that APP figures were bragging about cabinet-level meetings near Trump's inner circle, talking about a separate transition loan for independence and selling Alberta's resources as a security gift to the United States.
That's the trade they're lining up. Your so-called independence in exchange for a future where the U.S. gets your oil, your water, your leverage, and you get the privilege of arguing with an insurance company when your kid breaks an arm.
So when a news piece says, in recent months, and as recently as last week, separatists have been wooing the Trump administration, well, that's not an exaggeration.
And there's a deeper problem with this whole fantasy that almost never shows up in their speeches. This isn't just Alberta versus Ottawa. There's a third party in this story that they keep trying to erase, the original treaty partners.
Alberta sits on Treaties 6, 7, and 8 land. Those agreements are between First Nations and the Crown, or Canada, not between First Nations and the Alberta Prosperity Project, and not between First Nations and some future Republic of Alberta. A judge has already said you can't run a separation campaign that pretends those treaties do not exist.
That means something very simple. This is not your land to sell. You do not get to fly to Washington, talk about our resources, and trade away territory that was never actually ceded to you in the way you're pretending.
When these guys sit in boardrooms in DC and Buenos Aires talking about pipelines, minerals, and water as bargaining chips, they're bargaining with land and rights that belong in law and in history to indigenous nations. They're trying to move pieces on a map that they did not draw and do not own. The APP pushed a citizens' initiative question to Elections Alberta. After months of legal fights over whether it violated the Constitution, that was solved when the provincial government passed Bill 14, which lets citizen initiatives go ahead even if they raise constitutional concerns. So, if you think Danielle Smith wasn't involved, who pushed that bill?
And now Elections Alberta has approved their question. The wording is simple and it's devastating. Do you agree that Alberta should stop being a part of Canada and become an independent state?
That's not a symbolic resolution. That is a direct invitation to walk away from Canada. Jeff Rath told the reporter exactly what they asked for: immediate U.S. recognition of Alberta as an independent country if there's a yes vote, a big financial health study by Wall Street names like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, and a plan to secure a $500 billion line of credit from the United States to bankroll Alberta's exit.
$500 billion in debt. What a great way to start. From the same country whose president is literally dropping missiles on Nigeria, blowing up boats off the coast of Venezuela, and threatening to blockade their oil, squeezing Canada with tariffs, threats, and still threatening to turn us into the 51st state. And that is the guy they think they can trust more than Canada. Think about the choice they're making there. They look at 40 million Canadians, a charter of rights, treaties, a working democracy, and they say, no, we'd rather hitch Alberta to Trump.
So, when they tell you that this is about taking our land back from Ottawa, remember whose land we're actually standing on. They're not taking anything back. They're trying to resell what was never theirs in the first place at a discount to Trump's America.
So I'm curious, Dave, about how much support is out there, really.
Well, Rath and Davies claim they've seen independent support as high as 45 or even 52% in recent months. But when the reporter asked to see those polls, they didn't provide anything solid, just vague references and social media surveys that we know are easy to fix.
Actual pollsters tell a different story. Angus Reid found Separatist sentiment about 30% way back in April, which is still high, but a lot has changed. And innovative research saw it soften after the federal election, putting it likely below 30. That was a long time ago, too.
Yeah, but that still means millions of people across the prairies are angry enough to flirt with that idea. You can't shrug that off.
But it also means that a clear majority of Albertans are not on board with blowing up the country, nearly 75% as of April.
And that gap is crucial because if you let the loudest voices define the narrative, foreign governments will start to believe that Canada is already falling apart.
And that's what scares us. It's not just the theoretical referendum. It's the way these trips and these headlines chip away at Canada's image as a stable, unified country.
We spent 2 decades traveling through regions where this kind of thing went further than anyone expected, so we know.
Yeah, we've walked through cities in the Balkans and the Caucasus where borders were redrawn, where foreign powers backed one side or another, where referendums and deals were used to justify changes that people are still living with today. And we saw how lucky we are to live in Canada. That's why we choose to live here.
Yeah, you heard the same phrases prop up everywhere. We just want to negotiate from a position of strength. We just want recognition. We want options.
And you see the same pattern. External powers move in, money and influence follow, and suddenly internal arguments that should be settled at home are being decided in foreign capitals overseas. And we saw the divide firsthand. It is the rich that prosper and regular citizens that pay the price.
That's why this Alberta story hits such a nerve with us. We are watching our own country flirt with that script. One side, you have Canadians saying, we want to fix this country. We want Alberta treated fairly inside Canada.
And on the other, you have people flying to Washington, then to Latin America and saying, we want you to be ready to support us when we walk away.
And in the middle, you have a legal system trying to hold the line on charter rights and treaty obligations while politicians tinker with the rules.
So let's frame this clearly. Canada's position is we support Alberta. I was born there. It is a province in our sovereign country. We decide our future here. We defend our economy, our social programs, and our charter against the outside pressures.
So where does all of this actually leave us?
Well, if you're watching this from Alberta, you have more power than anyone else in this story. You can refuse to sign that petition. You can refuse to play along with people who think it's acceptable to shop your future around Washington and Buenos Aires.
And if you're watching from the rest of Canada, you can stop pretending that this is some distant prairie drama that doesn't touch you.
If Alberta goes, Canada is not the same country. Our economy changes, our security changes, our treaties change, our entire map changes.
And even if Alberta never leaves, every step towards that cliff edge weakens our voice on the world stage. It gives Trump and anyone like him leverage that they should never have over us.
You do not have to accept this as the future. You can support campaigns that defend a united Canada. You can call out politicians who flirt with separatism when it suits them. You can demand that Ottawa deals with Alberta's grievances inside the country, but not by threatening to burn it down.
And most of all, you can refuse to let a handful of self-appointed envoys speak for you in foreign capitals. Because at the end of the day, this is not their country to sell.
Hey, we all know Canada's not perfect. We have a lot of work to do, but we're working on it, and it's worth defending. And that starts with saying clearly that we will not let foreign-backed separatists break us apart. We stand with you, Alberta. Do you stand with us?
So that'll do it for today. If this really struck a nerve with you, leave a comment below and let us know where you stand on this situation.
And share it with that separatist friend that thinks leaving Canada is going to be great, because we all know it's not. And make sure to like, subscribe, and click on that bell so you get notifications, because we are putting out a lot of videos about Canada and our sovereignty. See you tomorrow, everybody, and check out all the links below for merch, the A-Team, and subscribe to our Substack. There's a lot going on, even in the Facebook group, and we want to hear from you.
Ciao for now, and we'll see you tomorrow.